Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Democratic Innovation to Address Big Challenges. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. I know most of you are coming from either class or from work, and it's been a long day, so I really do appreciate all of you for joining us tonight. I'm just going to take a quick moment to introduce myself. My name is Bree Lemieux. I am the AE Program Lead at the Rhode Island Executive Office of Health and Human Services. I'll be co-moderating today's session alongside my partner in crime here, Allegra, who is the Chief of Healthcare Equity at the Rhode Island Department of Health. So just some quick housekeeping items. The bathrooms is located right outside the door to the right near the elevators. We will also be having an open discussion later on during the presentations. So we ask that you hold or save all of your questions for then, and we'll be happy to answer them at that time. Also, Pam, I don't know if there was handouts given with the QR code.
If not, my friends they can bring them around if you didn't have the handout with the QR code.
So if you want to follow along to the presentations tonight, you can use the QR code and access the slides that way. So just going over briefly today's agenda, I'm going to do a quick intro to PB. We're going to do a warm-up session, and then we'll do info share with our first presentation being PB in education and then PB in health. And then we'll open up and have a discussion with the panelists as well as the audience. So we do hope that you engage and ask as many questions as you would like. Oh, and I can't forget this. At the end, we'll have wine and cheese reception. That's really important, so I do have to plug that in there. So before we get started, I do just want to introduce the incredible folks on the panel that will also be presenting on how they've embraced PB here in Rhode Island to address challenges both in the public education and health spectrum. So first we have Dr. Jonathan Collins, a senior assistant professor of political science, public policy, and education here at Brown University. We have Matthew Leo, our research assistant class at Brown 2024. We have Michelle Alas-Molino, research assistant, that is joining us on Zoom, class at Brown 2025. On the health side, we have Becky Marcus, the assistant program director from LISC, who supports the Pawtucket Central Falls Health Equity Zone. We have Lucy Berman, the associate director of advocacy and organizing from One Neighborhood, who supports the Central Province Health Equity Zone. We have Joanna Yeboah, a Pawtucket resident and member of the Pawtucket Central Falls Steering Committee. And last but not least, we have Pam Jennings, the PB Technical Assistant Coordinator and the guru of all things PB, who supported both the public education and health equity side of PB. I also just want to take the time to acknowledge anyone in the audience who has been involved in PB. If you could just raise your hands for us, please, in any capacity. Thank you all so much for your contribution and dedication to implementing PB in Rhode Island as well. So this is really just a broad definition of what PB is. It's a democratic process where community members decide on how to spend part of a public budget. Communities have the power to make real decisions about real money, and it's really a tool of empowerment that gives direct decision-making power to residents, community members, youth, over needs that they've identified and want to prioritize. It originated back in 1989 in Brazil and has since reached and been successful in over 10,000 cities worldwide. And thanks to the hard work of the panelists and the people in the audience here with us today and so many others, PB has been happening in Central Falls, Pawtucket, and Providence for almost 5 years now, and over $1.6 million has been invested in our schools and health equity zones through PB. So these are just a few positive impacts of participatory budgeting. You build more inclusive political participation, right? So we have center the voices of people who have been historically excluded or marginalized from civic participation and processes. You have strengthened connections among residents, city leaders, agencies, and community organizations. So we enable that clinical community linkages, that community linkage with the government, and we drive more equitable distribution of public resources. So more equitable and effective state and public investments. So we're gonna do a warm-up pop quiz, and I do have candy. My son in the back said that no adults like candy, and I disagree. So if you get this answer right, please make sure to take some candy so I can prove him wrong.
Does everybody have a little index card?
Okay, so you're gonna write the answer down and you're gonna put it up in the air for me. What is the total amount of the annual state budget for Rhode Island for fiscal year 2024? It is E. So Marquise, can you pass out the candy for anyone who had E, if you can just raise your hand? All right, we're not done. We have one more question, so you can redeem yourself. 2, of the 14 billion total, how much of the state budget is spent on education and health and human services? Here we go. It is B. So anyone who had B, if you can just keep your hand raised and you get some candy. All right, so I'm going to pass it along to Dr. Collins and his team to present on PB in the school districts.
All right, good evening. Yeah, I don't even know why I have my iPad here because it just has the slides. But here we go. Professor Collins here, the director of the Paved Research Initiative, and we've been engaged in participatory budgeting in schools projects for a little bit over 3 years, and that's the aspect of what we want to talk about today. I'm just going to frame it for you before we get into the folks who really know what they're talking about, which is going to be Matthew and Michelle. The broader idea here is that, so much of how education finance is dictated is by people who spend hardly any time in the schools. And PB for us was a way in which we could democratize the process of school improvement. We talk so much about urban schools and how they're failing and how the kids and tests, but we've never designed strategic opportunities to put kids at the center of how we think about improving schools. And so that's what we've been doing with the participatory budgeting in schools initiatives. I'll give you a little bit more background about, I won't, but Michelle is going to give you a little bit more background about the literature on participatory budgeting, and that's going to walk us through towards the design work that Matthew has been spearheading for our research team. And we'll get into a little bit of the results too. Should be a good conversation. See you at Q&A.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michelle. I wish I was there in person with y'all. I'm currently abroad, but I am so excited to be here.
Where are you?
I am in Paris, France right now. Could we move on to the next slide?
We're Haiti.
Can we move on to the next slide, please?
Oh, I have the slide. Sorry, Michelle.
Don't worry about it, Dr. C. Okay, so as was mentioned before, PB started in Porto Alegre, Brazil. So I wanted to start with a quote from Brazilian theorist, philosopher, and educator Paulo Freire, who believed that schools are one of the foremost tools for social mobility. And that is, education for democracy cannot be separated from the practice of democracy, and that democracy can be learned more effectively through direct and active participation in one's communities. And that is exactly what PB does. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So we use a model of school PB that is adopted from the city PB model that has been replicated in thousands of cities across the world from the process that began in Porto Alegre, Brazil. And what's really great about this process is that it's replicable. It's replicable at really any level of governance. And at the root of this democratic process is this substantive discourse among the residents of a city, among the polis, among the students in a school, which identifies the needs of the population and works in tandem with the local government or the school administration to execute these approved projects. So there's really 3 prongs for PB. It's a replicable decision-making process, whereas citizens, residents, students deliberate publicly over the distribution of public resources that are allocated by a city, state, or federal government. So at the school level, Community Decides follows this fundamental skeleton with some minor changes. The PB process that we instituted at New England Public Middle School had a $10,000 grant awarded by Brown University. We held deliberation in a PB class that all students could opt into, but it wasn't necessarily open to all students. Anyone could opt in, but then after students opted in, it was a closed process. The deliberation is guided and structured around this PB class with some parameters that are instituted by the teachers, which were the research assistants. And the local government, quote unquote, is the school administration, as well as the staff that decides the feasibility of the project. Next slide, please. So these are some of the fundamental goals for the Community Decides project. We are aiming to address a civic learning opportunity gap, particularly with low-income students and students of color. At the middle school that we worked with, we had a large number of Latina students, a large number of students whose first language is not Spanish, a large number of students on free or reduced lunch, and we were really aiming to open up opportunities for civic learning that for students that institutionally have lower levels of access. So within these civic learning opportunities, students are meant to develop their civic knowledge, attitudes, skills, and practices. And it's also meant to contribute to a positive school climate by deepening relationships and increasing trust and feelings of belonging so that students feel like they actually have a voice in the school, they are an active participant, and they are working together with their peers to better their learning. We can move on to the next slide, and I'll pass it off to Matthew.
Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew. I first started working with Dr. Collins in my freshman year, and it was at the height of COVID. And those goals that Michelle just mentioned weren't actually the goals that we started with when we started the Community Decides process. Initially, we had a research design that included all of the school's communities. So we included students, parents, and staff to a series of 5 online meetings. And the goal with those meetings was to narrow certain spending priorities into one single spending priority. And we found that through this process that actually it was really hard to get students to these online Zoom meetings because they were so exhausted already at school. And so what we had to do is actually go in person, and this is a photo of me in my freshman year. We would go to individual classrooms and collect data from students, asking them what they would spend $10,000 on. And we actually gathered a lot of really rich data from that experience, including the fact that students were really concerned with certain priorities that were very, very, you could say, like, rational. They were asking about things like food. They were asking about things like bathrooms. It wasn't things that were outrageous or necessarily over the top, but things that would actually help and benefit in their education. Next slide, please. And so the outcome for the first year was actually the implementation of a cooking class and a gardening club for the school, which came after a series of concessions with the faculty and staff members as well as the parents who were involved in the process. And so you can see that the student and they're like, it bought like the scissors and everything for the gardening class, and then also the cooking supplies as well for the club. Next slide, please. And so year 2, especially after doing another participatory budgeting project at the city level in Central Falls, was when we really changed the model to a more PB-centered model. And it focused completely on the student's experience for the first time. And we really noted that there was so much positive feedback from last year's experience that we really wanted to kind of further that. And we also implemented an outreach and town hall activity for the very first time. The outreach activity was actually very similar to the opening activity that we did today. We asked students questions about their school's budget and also asking them what kinds of things that, again, would they spend money on, and that was the second component of the town hall activity. And students were able to kind of interact and discuss as well as learn more about budgeting in their schools. And this deliberative component that was part of both the outreach and town hall activity was critical to help students engage with the principles of PB that we wanted to kind of highlight. And then finally, certain students would be chosen or delegated to join a class and further develop a spending priorities agreement that detailed specific investments and purchases. And so this was the second year. We actually had 3 projects that won this year because we separated students by grade level. So bathroom upgrades won, as well as food-related projects, which Michelle will talk a little bit more about later, as well as reusable water bottles, which we gave 1 to each student. And then by our third year, because our model was relatively strong at that point, we were just formalizing and kind of getting out the kinks in the system or the design. And so our outreach activities focused on knowledge gain and exposure. And we also restructured slightly the outreach and town hall activities so that they built and reinforced knowledge that was first gained. So when we asked the question earlier today about the budgeting of, let's say, health and education in PB, we would ask that question again and see, and we would measure if, students retain that knowledge. And we found that actually students had, retained a lot of these skills that they had built up over 3 years of working with us because we were working in the same school. And then finally, we also created a packageable curriculum. So that meant that we kind of put our model together so that we could kind of send this class as well as these outreach and town hall components to any middle school and expect similar outcomes with some flexibility. All right, next slide, please. And I'm going to pass it back to Michelle.
Thanks, Matthew. So as Matthew mentioned, this was really a work of trial and error over the past 3 years. So what the final year 3 Community Decides timeline that I had the privilege of working on also since my freshman year looks a little bit like this. So in October, we start out by going into the middle school and we start giving the students an initial exposure to PB with 3 outreach activities, 1 for each grade level. It's basically explaining what PB is, explaining the projects that have won in the past, and the power that they're going to have to choose what to do with these $10,000. And then in November, December, we hold a series of town halls. Students from the entire school rank their needs, some of the needs that Matthew mentioned, and simulate PB decision-making. This past year, we had one activity where students simulated having to decide what to do with their ice cream shop. Did they want a new refrigerator? Did they want to rebuild the storefront? Did they want new flavors? So they were simulating, okay, what is it that we actually need? And how is it that we can use the money to best meet the needs of the people? And then in the spring semester, students are chosen both randomly and through self-selection. So what does this mean? So students are surveyed throughout the town halls and they can check off whether or not they want to be part of a participatory budgeting class. But we don't want just those students who maybe have an exposure to civic learning, who maybe have that impetus to check that box. We don't want just those students in the class. We want the class to be representative of the entire school population. So we also have in that class some students who were randomly selected to be part of the Community Decides participatory budgeting class. And so for around 8 weeks, students are partaking in this Community Decides class and learning what PB and budgeting is. And I'm going to go into the curriculum on the next slide. And around April and May, we have this final announcement of projects, a final surveying, and an execution of the projects. And that can take a couple more months. We can move on to the next slide. So this is the curriculum for the Community Decides class, and we developed this over a series of 3 years. And this past year we were lucky enough to be working with Masters of Arts in Teaching students to develop this curriculum. So students first are learning about what budgets are. They're making practice budgets. We had a practice budget where they take it to Providence Place Mall. They would discuss their preferences for spending the money. They would choose preferred groups, so they kind of form little blocks. They do field research in the cafeteria. This is actually my favorite lesson that we did. They do field research in the cafeteria to learn their peers' ideas. So they'd go in and they'd ask their classmates what is it that they wanted to do with the money, what is it that they thought about the projects that were being developed in the PB class. They'd learn from experts such as Sodexo, who deals with the food or school administration to help explain the feasibility of the projects that they were thinking of. They were then making arguments for their projects. They would choose one project to focus on, so they had to do some voting, and then they would make a final project. They decide on a final project, and they make a line by line item budget on what it is that they wanted to spend the $10,000 on. And we ended up having multiple projects in the end. So what's really great about this is the pedagogical component of PB. Students are not just making a budget, they're not just deciding on a project, but they're learning the entire time.
So I'm just going to talk really briefly about the second project that we were working on towards the beginning of this year, actually. And we were doing this project called Power to the Pupil, which was, there was $100,000 that we got from the Fund for the Education of the Children of Providence, which is a crazy acronym, and I had to put it up there, otherwise I would forget it. And it asked a very similar question to our original question of how do we talk about civic engagement in the classroom, but instead we're asking the question here about who are the decision makers when it comes to redistribution. And so with this $100,000, that was our particular focus. We wanted to have students make decisions about a very kind of contentious money, let's just put it like that. And so, next slide, please. And so we kind of built off the Community Decides model in order to create a three-stage model for Power to the Pupil, which was designed to mainly be a 2-day event. So first, at stage one, we worked at Nathaniel Green Middle School, very similar to the outreach activity that we did for Community Decides, and to introduce students to student empowerment and the context of the redistribution fund and what it meant to be redistributing money. And then stage two was a town hall activity, which I will get into in a second. And then stage three was the delegate summit, where a group of students were brought back to the Brown University campus to define parameters for a funded project.
We went to them. We went to them.
Oh, you went to them? Oh.
Yeah, we went to their school.
We went, originally, we were supposed to do that.
That was the original design, yeah.
Next slide, please, Dr. Collins. And so stage two, or the town hall, was a large field trip where we brought around 120 students, right?
Yeah.
Is that right? So our plan was to bring originally 200 students. It ended up being closer to 120 students to the Brown University campus. And one of our biggest original challenges was to figure out what the students would be making decisions on. So we settled on the idea that students would be making decisions on how to bring 10 project categories, which were things like extracurricular activities or facilities improvements or things like that, into one chosen category over the span of a day. And I won't really go into it. I'm happy to answer any questions about it, but I just want to highlight the equity workshop, which was led by the Swearer Center. And this was a critical component of Power to the Pupil because it introduced students to the ideas surrounding equity and why that might be important when making a decision for an entire school district. I'm gonna pass it back to Michelle.
So I wanted to leave you all with this from Tara Bartlett, who has written a lot of literature on school participatory budgeting. School participatory budgeting is a promising civic learning tool designed to prepare young people to be active, engaged participants in civic life for the long term by developing students' civic capacities like sense of agency, collective problem solving, and communication and research skills, deepening relationships, trust, and cohesion in school community, and making meaningful improvements to the school campus through democratic decision making. That is really what we were aiming to do with our curriculum, with Power to the Pupil, and making sure that students are developing into engaged citizens, that they are feeling like they belong in school, that they are developing projects that help their learning, and that we're opening up forums for democratic discourse. An example of this is, Matthew mentioned this earlier, but students wanted to do projects with food and the cafeteria food, and that didn't end up get funded by PB because Sodexo heard their needs and then ended up doing the project on their own outside the PB scope. And then students could put their energy into other PB projects, since that already opened up the fountains for Sodexo to hear them. So that's just another byproduct of PB, and that really is what has been great about this process. And if we move on to the next slide, we have some quotes from students. So I'm not going to read them out loud, but you can read them for yourself.
And these
on
are students who took the implementation course.
Yes,
PB
these are students who took the Community
8-week.
Decides class. Yes, correct. These are students who took the Community Decides class on if they feel that students should be the ones making decisions regarding their school and their learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
And as we hand it off, the thing that I'll say too, just to put a bow on everything, is that the thing that we've been trying to do with these projects, Community Decides, Power to the Pupil, is we've been trying to figure out how do you get mass groups of students, not just a couple of kids who are student leaders, like how do you get the entire student body involved in a process to determine how a school should be improved? And, have we perfected it? Have we nailed it? Not quite, but we've made a lot of momentum towards a model that can achieve that, right? It shouldn't just be the kids who want to sit at the front of the class and raise their hands who are asked to be a part of these decision-making processes. It should be the kid that sits in the back and doesn't really care about math or history or English language arts, but they have every right to be involved in these kinds of democratic processes, and we think that there's value in that long term.
Thank you so much, Dr. Collins, Michelle, and Matthew. So before we pass it along to the health equity zones, which is Lucy, Becky, and Joanna, I will just say the funding mechanism for the project you're about to hear is from the Rhode Island Executive Office of Health and Human Services. So we invested $900,000 of the Health System Transformation Project funds to implement the participatory budgeting pilot program. And if you want to know more about HSTP, it's a little complicated, so you can always pull me aside. I'm happy to answer that. But EOHHS partnered with RIDO to utilize and run the PB process through their health equity zones, as the HES model has established community infrastructure and community relationships and truly understands the work of health equity. So with that being said, I will pass it along to you guys.
All right, hello everyone. I'm Lucy and I work at One Neighborhood Builders, which functions as the backbone of the Central Providence Opportunities Health Equity Zone. Before we get into talking about our PB process in our health equity zone, thank you, just a little bit of background about what a health equity zone even is. And we will be using the abbreviation HES going forward, so keep that in mind. So back in 2012, the Department of Health recognized the need for a place-based approach to improving health equity across the state and launched what used to be called the Centers for Health Equity and Wellness. And over a couple of years, they learned what worked well, what didn't, and in 2015 established the HES model. There are currently 15 health equity zones across the state, 15. And 2 of them received this HSTP funding through the Executive Office of Health and Human Services. One of them was, like I said, the Central Providence Opportunities HES, and the other was LISC, which Becky works for, and which is the backbone of the Pawtucket Central Falls Health Equity Zone. So health equity zones are built basically on these 4 concepts. One, it's the approach to improving health outcomes across a state has to be equity centered. So that means that within each geography, health disparities that are particular to that geography have to be addressed. There can't just be an equal and basically the same approach to improving health in every place. The other is that it's place-based. It has to be confined to a certain geographic area in order to be specific to the needs of the population in that area. It addresses the social determinants of health, which means it takes a more preventative focused approach to improving health disparities. It looks at upstream factors of health. So rather than just looking at how many visits to a doctor is a person able to make a year, it's also things like, do you have access to healthy food? Do you have a connection to your neighbors? Are you a political participant? Access to job opportunities and quality education. So it's very widely spanning. And of course, that it's community-led. So as Bree mentioned, the reason why this process was done through the health equity zones was because the backbones of the HESs already have connections to the community. We're grounded in the priorities of the people who live in the neighborhoods of our health equity zones. Otherwise, they wouldn't work.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about how did Okay, so how did participatory budgeting work in the HES? So as you can see, it's a timeline. It begins with the designing of the process where the steering committee are people from the community, members that represents the community, creates rules and engagement plan. And then we moved that, and then we went on to brainstorming ideas. We did town hall meetings to educate the public with online tools. Residents get to share and discuss ideas for projects. And then we moved on to developing proposals where we had change agents also that are members of the community to develop ideas into feasible proposals. So those proposals were turned into on the ballots. And it was time to vote. And some of the places that we got to vote were schools, were the stores, parks, libraries, for example. And then we, after voting, of course, it was the funding of the winning projects where the government or the institution funds and implements the winning ideas. Okay. So the steering committee, which is one of the excited, I was one of the steering committees last year with the HES. So we created rule books for the process, and there was oversight throughout. Some of the questions that we asked was who can submit ideas. I'm not going to read the whole thing. Who can vote? Can both infrastructure and programs be funded? So these are some of the questions that we had to answer at the beginning stages of being part of the steering committee. And then we moved on to the idea collections where we're asking residents about what would you invest funds to improve health in your community? So we had a T-shirt called Together We Can, Todos Podemos. I'm proud HES. So some of the things that we talked about was, about pop-ups, food pantries. These are some of the places: town hall meetings, acting workshops, drop boxes, etc., etc. Okay. And then next was the proposal development. We had interpreters, multilingual, multi-generational committees of residents work together to develop project proposals. Committees with project collaborators from organizations and city agents help to design feasible projects tailored to the context of the city. So we had some educational process in that, in this section as well. And then voting. So at this part, residents decide which projects will receive funding. So in Port Harcourt and Central Falls, we had more than 800 people that voted. And in Central Providence, more than 1,200 people voted. And as you, I don't know if you guys have the handouts. Okay, it's been passed out. Official ballots were created by Department of State. Okay, and some of the voting locations, including vote parties, city hall, schools, library, food pantry, grocery stores, social service organizations, and then we had a QR code on decideri.org where people could also, those that couldn't attend these locations, go to these locations, could do that online. And some of the projects that were voted for implementation, the top one, this was on the right side, you can see that the top winning project was the sprinkler, water, and outdoor gym equipment. people were excited about that. Basically, everybody was excited about the project. So we had some that were, kind of grieving that their project or proposal didn't win, but it was all good for the community. And then the second was the mental health end of stigma campaign that won, and also, do you want to do this again?
So something worth noting here before I get into the projects that won in Central Providence, if you're looking at this and wondering, why did so many more win in Central Providence? We were working with a bigger budget. So both of the health equity zones received $450,000 of that $900,000 that was distributed through HSTP. And we were actually able to match that with private money to bring our total to $1 million that was being voted on. So that's why we have more projects. We didn't just do more. So we were able to fund 4 larger projects and then 4 small projects. Each of the 4 small ones have a budget of $30,000, and those are the ones on the bottom. And our big projects were actually improving park amenities, including but not limited to bathrooms, a lead-free water project, which allows us to distribute a number of lead filters to people with lead in their pipes, peer mental health training for students at local schools to learn how to identify signs of mental health crises in each other and direct them to resources and train their peers in the same skills, and improving a number of our bus shelters. The smaller projects include a life skills class for youth, food-bearing tree planting throughout Central Providence, a soccer league for Central Providence youth, and a bike distribution and repair program. We also just wanted to point out briefly that there were many projects that weren't funded. You can see them for Pawtucket Central Falls on your ballots that you have. We also have some ballots from Central Providence if you're curious to see them. But some projects that were on the ballot that generated a lot of excitement but ultimately weren't funded. One to distribute the lead filters, air filters, especially for folks suffering from asthma. That got a lot of votes but wasn't funded. Another interesting project that generated excitement but wasn't funded was actually designed by students at Mount Pleasant High School, and that was to install laundry machines in Mount Pleasant High and one other high school in Central Providence for kids who aren't able to wash their clothes at home.
And also, I just want to also emphasize that for Pawtucket and Central Falls, so the money was allocated with the size of the people living in that city. So just a disclaimer that it's not that one city had more money than the other. It was all based on the size. So between Pawtucket and Central Falls, we have $385,000. And some of the projects that some of the proposals included financials for families where family just bringing education to the families that usually would not have access to educations to financial literacy. And one of my favorite ones was SATS for Hope mobile laundry truck. I don't want to go through all of them, but it was exciting because with the homeless population, which is one of the highest need in the state, they have, housing is an issue, but where are they, food, they have food resources, but where are they washing their clothes? So that was another exciting, proposals that, was developed.
Okay, so what did we learn throughout this process? We can't really get into the outcomes and what we learned without shouting out some of the people here, like Giselle, who was out there collecting these ideas, organizing basketball tournaments, getting people to vote. Ashley and Yaidalis for your incredible time tabulating all this data. So what did we learn from all their hard work? So So this was Medicaid dollars, and actually Medicaid recipients were really involved, kind of at every stage. So that was a good portion of the steering committee, the budget delegates, the folks who created the project proposals, and voters, as well as folks who identified as not having health insurance. But that was something we were tracking, right? Because it's our Medicaid recipients deciding where these dollars go. Also, just want to shout out, that's a bus shelter ad. So we had like bus ads trying to get people to come out and vote with the amazing Diane on them. Okay. And then, when we looked at race and ethnicity, one kind of story I can tell from the data here is, so for example, in Pawtucket Central Falls in our process, we noticed that because like Ashley helped us be able to like really analyze our data midstream, right? So we noticed we were doing a pretty good job in the idea collection phase of reaching folks who identified as Hispanic or Latinx, but not as much at identifying people who identify as people of color. So we were really trying to focus on that more in our vote phase, and so we were really trying to outreach more to people who identify as people of color, and especially Cape Verdean communities in Pawtucket. But we were also still going back to the folks who had submitted ideas, because there's a lot of satisfaction in getting to see something that resembled your idea on the ballot and vote for it. So some of our takeaways. So I hope y'all voted on Election Day. That just happened. So about a third, a little more than a third of the people who voted in our process said that they they rarely, sometimes, or never vote. So that was pretty significant. We had a bunch of youth participating, as Giselle knows. And so, yeah, like we organized youth town halls and basketball tournaments. And so, you know, young people in Central Providence, 13 and up, in Pawtucket Central Falls, 14 and up, as decided by the steering committee, could vote and also engage in developing proposals. So that was pretty huge, right? Young people having that opportunity. And for a lot of people, this was their first opportunity to vote in the United States. And that was really so significant that the Secretary of State's office provided those real ballots. So, you know, people who don't have citizenship, youth, right? People who just maybe didn't have that access before. So that was great to be able to reach technically ineligible voters. And then also, you know, we could see that participatory budgeting shows engagement over time, and I bet they can speak to that in the schools as well. But, you know, Central Falls had been doing these kinds of processes for many years, so folks identified as having heard of PB before at a higher rate. So that's promising. And we got a lot of positive words when we asked them to sum it up in one word, so that was fun. Okay, and so something that was also kind of cool from Ashley's data was that we could see some significant, like across the board increase in people's civic engagement skills among the change agents or budget delegates. The significant differences were in three categories, like gaining more comfort with public speaking, understanding government documents, and understanding budget spreadsheets, which anyone got a deeper understanding of that than they probably wanted to. And yeah, and I think, you know, for facilitators, that was like also an exciting moment to be entrusted with that responsibility of your committee. Yeah, and I'll pass it off to Lucy.
Just a couple of other key takeaways from the process. At the end of the process, we asked our steering committee members and budget delegates how, if at all, the process changed the way they think about health and the health of their community. And you can read the key takeaways up here, but a couple that I want to pull out. One is that they came away with a different understanding of what health is. As I was talking about before with the health equity zones, this allowed us to take an upstream approach to improving health. And so people walked away with this understanding, oh, housing is health. It actually is health to consider if I have access to healthy food. There was also an expression of gratitude for the recognition that residents are experts of their own experience. Nobody knows more about a community than people who live in it. And there was also some new trust that we were definitely battling a lot of mistrust, asking how people would spend $1 million. Like, there has to be a catch here, or you're not actually going to spend it the way that we tell you to. And so there was some, with that gratitude for being recognized as experts and decision makers, there was some new trust that we got to build as well. I'll let you read through these reflections for yourself. But again, to highlight just one of them, my personal favorite, a steering committee member from Central Providence walked away with the conclusion that we simply need to do it again. Another big challenge was describing to people what PB is as we were doing it, and we learned a lot from doing it the first time. So hopefully there will be opportunities for those who were involved to have a chance to be involved again. And big picture takeaways. So across the board, there was demonstrated increased comfort with civic engagement skills. It'll take a long time to measure if this will have an impact on voter behavior going forward, but hopefully it does. And we learned that more community engagement is health promoting. When people have a say in the investments being made in their communities, health improves. I don't think we have time to show this video, which makes me glad we put it at the end of our presentation, not at the beginning like it was before. But we'll be able to share this link, or if you just go on YouTube and look up 9 Neighborhood Fund, you can watch this pretty excellent summary of what we did. I can say that because I wasn't interviewed in it. It's very well put together.
So also that lovely video, which is really, it's 3 minutes, so it's very well worth watching. It also lives on the decideri.org website, which leads us to how you can learn more about all this that we've been talking about, because we are just scratching the surface, like really scratching the surface. There's tons of amazing literature and resources out there to learn more, including on some of these great websites. So the Paved Research team has pavedresearch.com. Also, as I mentioned, decideri.org, which was not only where people could go and vote in the health equity zone processes, but it's sort of like now the repository of all the projects and all the information about what happened. There's a national organization called the Participatory Budgeting Project. They have a great website with a ton of resources. They're just at participatorybudgeting.org. And then I want to mention too, at the beginning, we passed around a little half sheet with a QR code on it. So you can use that to access all these slides, because there's some really great like reading material that I would suggest, reading and listening material. So the Watson Institute put out an amazing podcast and interviewed Professor Collins all about the work, the incredible work that's been happening in the schools and around the state and PB. So I highly recommend listening to that. There's a couple of other great news links here as well. The PVDI is a pretty new and emerging news source around Providence to cover these types of stories. You'll also find all the contact information to all the folks who have been up here talking today, because, clearly we all love talking about participatory budgeting, so we would love to keep talking more about it. So please reach out to any of us to talk a little bit more and talk about maybe how it might fit in the communities and work that you all are doing. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to our lovely moderators.
Than 2 years ago that we were sitting in a room, Pam, talking about should we maybe do this thing, and now we're already here. It's crazy. So again, my name is Allegra Scharf. I'm the Chief of Healthcare Equity at the Rhode Island Department of Health, and I, along with Bree, have been supporting this project with the health equity zones from the state side. My role here tonight is to ask our amazing panelists a few questions, and then to turn some questions to you guys to talk about amongst yourselves. After we do the activity where you guys will get to engage with each other, we will have time for questions for our panelists as well from you guys. Two very broad questions. I'll start with the first one, and that is, what surprised you most about this process? And before you answer, I'd also like to say I know there's some young people in the room who participated as well, so feel free to answer that question if you'd like. So again, what surprised you most about this process?
Allegra's standing up. I mean, Alondra.
Yeah, grab a mic.
Come grab a mic.
Yep. Test it, make sure it's on.
So I'm from Central Falls High School, and the first time I participated in participatory budgeting was Voces con Poder. And in the past, I've always wanted to be, well, I wanted to become a teacher, and I thought of education as only having like educators. But Voces con Poder made me realize that there's a broader aspect to education. So now I want to see if I can do policy. So I'm also from Central Falls, and the first time I did participatory budgeting was 2 years ago, I think. It was also Voces con Poder, and what surprised me most was the crowd of people there was very diverse. Like the first time I did it, we focused on education, and I was like 13 when I went, and I was so surprised because there were kids, there were older folks, like there were all types of age groups, all races. So I thought that was really interesting, and it was really fun working with a lot of people. So that's what's surprising me. And what surprised me most is that at first I used to be a very shy person, but after you get involved, it becomes a lot easier to know what to do and to get more involved in the community. So it was a very nice experience for me.
I mean, mic drop, we're done. Thank you guys so much. Is there anyone on this side of the room that wants to answer that question as well? What surprised you most about the process?
I'll jump in as the panel, to get the panel going. The biggest thing I think that always surprises me is how much the money is beside the point, right? Like, you come in and, you market this as a project where they're gonna spend a certain amount of money, but then you get deeper into the process and, you start to realize, and they start to realize that there are problems that can be solved without the money. And we've seen multiple examples where that happens, where it's just starting a conversation moves the administration and the folks in power to address something, which then that in and of itself is frustrating because it's like, well, why didn't you just do it already? Like, why did we have to do all this in the first place? But that's one of the biggest things, is that you notice that, like, well, hey, is $10,000 a lot of money? No. Is $100,000 a lot of money? No. Is $1 million a lot of money? I mean, to me, but but in the grand scheme of a city, no. But it starts a conversation that leads to things that extend beyond the scope of what you can even do with just the money in and of itself.
I'd love to piggyback on what Giselle said about getting to work with people who are different from you. And when we were kind of structuring our process, we had some conversations like, should we have the committees be folks who speak the same language as each other, because that might be easier? Do the youth all want to work together and the adults all want to work together? And people were really like, no, like, we want to work with people who don't speak the same language and like have interpretation happening, and we want to work with young people and grown-ups. And right, like, when we think about our democracy today and the ways that we sometimes don't have hard conversations with people who might have a different background or think differently from us, that is just like such a powerful piece of participatory budgeting.
One more shot.
one of the things that surprised me the most was it became a tool that we got to educate the public. I remember once one of the outreaches that I was doing, one person said, there's a catch here, which party is behind this? And I said, this is for the community, is for the city. So then as we engage people and educated the public, then the level of trust, this is not a XY party behind this. This is money allocated for all of us living in the city. And for me, what surprised me most was I didn't know the depth of passion that it stirred up. It was like a fire that stirred up in me because all living here as an immigrant in Pawtucket, I've never lived in any other state apart from Pawtucket. All you hear is, Pawtucket and Central Falls is one of the low-income cities, the four core. You hear people, nothing good comes out from Pawtucket, Central Falls, and all that good stuff, all that negative stuff that is associated with living in the city. So when I became part of the steering committee, I saw Pawtucket was like, it went from like poor ye Pawtucket, poor ye Central Falls to like, we have a lot of gems in Pawtucket. We could make this, this participatory budgeting. I begin to see it in the future, like maybe 10 years from now, something great will be implemented. And I said that it all started from PB. Once upon a time, we were here talking about this and look at the future. So for me, it stirred up a lot of passion that I didn't know it will have an impact on, and even seeing the impact on my other fellow steering committees. And I'm like, oh, wow, I would love to take PB to Ghana. And so that because sometimes in the political process, it seems like, okay, you're voting for Joanna, but when I come in power, I promised you a bathroom, but this is what happened, and there's a lot of trust. But with PB, you physically see is the people making the decisions, is the people voting, is the people that chose. So there's no like, favoritism or all that. So I was surprised the impact it had on my peers as a steering committee member, and what it did is like, even when people say, Pawtucket, I said, no, come live in Pawtucket. Pawtucket, Central Falls, this is us. We're doing great things, and the world is going to see us someday. So it stirred up a fire that, for me, and pride as a Pawtucket resident, and also Central Falls, so.
That was really wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's go on to the next question, the second and last question that I will be asking you guys today. And that is, what lessons have you learned from the implementation of PB in your communities that you will take with you for your work in the future? If you need me to repeat it, please say so.
Well, I'm going to cheat and kind of answer the last question, which I think also speaks to this question because it's definitely a lesson we'll take forward. Something that was very surprising during proposal development was that the groups had to really be pushed to actually create big budgets for these projects. And Jonathan, as you mentioned earlier, Professor Collins, $1 million seems like a lot of money, not a lot of money. When we knew that that was the budget we were working with, we figured that that would go really fast and not cover that many projects. And something we realized during proposal development is the community members who are developing these projects kept coming up with these amazing ideas to cut the budgets. We can spend less money on this. I have a friend who sells this. We can work with him and get a deal on it. We don't need staff to implement this project. We can just volunteer. We can get community members together to make this thing happen. And there was this learning of, no, we have money and we actually have to spend it. It can't be used for anything other than this project. And it meant that we got to stop looking at something as a volunteer role and actually say, no, a person doing this deserves to be paid $20 an hour or whatever it may be. And I think that, a couple of takeaways from that. One, people aren't used to actually working with a fair amount of money that we usually don't have the money that it takes to implement a project and do it well, and that needs to change. And also it just speaks to, you know, the motivation that all of the participants had to make something work, even if they didn't have the funding behind it. Again, a tragic reality, something that shouldn't be true. But everybody was really willing to make it work, even if they couldn't. And we need to continue to have investments like this so that people can learn, no, you deserve to have money to fund your ideas.
I can say a few words. So I guess the first thing that I want to say is that really coming into working on Community Decides and Power to the People, I really had the sense that people were really apathetic about budgets and how people spent money within school districts. I know that as a high schooler, I think I was maybe briefly introduced to it, but very much so, there was this kind of separation that existed between being involved in government and then also being just like a student. And sometimes those things are not connected. And I think through the PB process, I really saw that there is a vital role that people need to have within their governments. I'm at Brown, I'm an architect by training. I study architecture and urban studies. And I think I've really learned more about how to meet people where they are in terms of knowledge and what it means to first begin by helping people learn more about where they're, because a lot of the times people don't know a lot about their communities, even though they live in it. So starting there and then giving them the ability or granting them the ability in order to make those really crucial decisions about how money is spent.
I can answer this question as well. So I actually have two ways that I'm going to take PB with me from what I've learned, what I've implemented, from what we've implemented. So the first is the power of the pedagogical component of PB. And I say this as someone who taught the PB class, who went into the middle school and was part of the teaching for Community Decides. And I have this memory of one of the 8th graders. She was Guatemalan and I'm Salvadoran, so we're both Central American. And she was saying to me at the end of the semester, she was telling me about how she grew up and how she wanted to, after taking this class, she wanted to go to Brown after. And a lot of what she said to me about her personal life really resonated with me on a very personal level, about us growing up in similar home environments. And it was very rewarding knowing that we had given her these tangible tools for not only making budgets, not only making decisions, but also gave her a precedent for having teachers who looked like her and who wanted her, really, really wanted her to succeed, as, as all the teachers do as well at the middle school that you're working at. But having teachers that looked like her, related to her on a very personal level, and that were young. So that's what I'm going to take with me. That's what I'm going to take away with me, is the power of this pedagogical component, the power of being a teacher, and just the power of going into schools and bringing participatory budgeting to students. And then the second thing is PB really has taken me all over the world. Like it started really with PB and Dr. Collins my freshman year, and it's taking me to Brazil, and now it's taking me to Paris. And so I'm learning really to connect the PB processes from the literature as it began in Porto Alegre, Brazil, as it's evolved in Brazil, as it's evolved in European cities, how the needs compare. So really looking at PB at these different levels has been extraordinary, because there are different needs based on different communities and the different geographies and the different levels of income. And these are all things to keep in mind as we are studying PB and as we're implementing new PB processes. Keep in mind the geography, the society that you're in, the communities that you're in. All PB is going to look differently. Yes, it's replicable, but it's all going to look different. So that's what I'm taking away with me.
Michelle, thank you so much. I have to be transparent. Your voice came out of nowhere for me. I don't do this very often, and I had a little mini panic all to myself. Anyway, we are running a little bit behind. I do want to do the next activity, but we're going to do it a little bit quickly just so that we all have an opportunity for you guys to ask the panelists some questions. So as I promised, we now want to put a question back on y'all. My family's from Texas, so y'all today. And that question is, what do you think should be the future of participatory budgeting in Rhode Island? So please take 3 to 5 minutes, turn into the people around you. If you have people around you, kind of scooch over if you don't, and have a little conversation about what you think the future of PB in Rhode Island should be. If you want to write this down on your index cards with your name, if you want to stay involved, we will collect those at the end as well. So does anyone want to share what they talked about? These mics are now working, so we'd love to hear from you. Please. Yes. Oh yeah, you share, you get some candy.
I guess, okay, there we go. I'm a little taller than usual.
I wasn't
so
expecting
there
to
you
tell.
go. So here's the thing. We talked about the future of PB, and we have somewhat of a shared vision of how it needs to spread more in the K-12 system. And the argument for that was that this is better, right? The argument for that was that one of the most fundamental problems in America is people's lack of understanding of how money operates. And at the end of the day, money isn't infinite, right? So we need to be able to manage it well. And that's why it needs to start in the K-12 system. But another thing that we talked about is it needs to climb its way up to the higher ed system. Really. It's now 1% of our national debt is student loans. 1% out of $33 trillion. So let's start with the K-12 system. Let's include more school districts and slowly but surely reach the higher ed system. That was our collective understanding and vision for it. Thank you all. And I have a question for later once we start the next segment.
Great.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I learned today, I didn't know this, that there is a packaged curriculum ready to go. So that can happen. All right, what's next? Go ahead.
Hi, is this on? This one's not on.
Sorry. Yeah, feel free.
Ready? Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Manny. I work with Pam at Central Falls High School, and I'm very excited to have Elizabeth share what we talked about.
So I was saying that participatory budgeting, I think, should be a thing that should be applied in every school, because for me, it was a very nice experience. And if I could choose to take that class again, I totally would. But it's very nice for kids to be knowledgeable about how the city and the state spends their money that goes to them. And it'd be nice if every kid had an opportunity to get involved in that.
One or two more folks want to share? I see this conversation happening over here. You want? No pressure. All right. If no one does, or if you do, it's hard to tell.
Can I jump in?
Yes,
Okay.
please do.
So I have a vision of PB happening all through K through 12, and then the young people that are engaged, which is all of them in the high schools, in the middle schools and high schools, then become the leaders when PB happens at their city or municipal level. And there's this continuity of young people, getting really engaged and then becoming the kind of boots on the ground and the catalyzers of PB beyond, once they're done with school and beyond.
All right. let's switch gears. I know we have some questions. We can start with you, and then if other folks have questions for our panelists or some of the young folks here, then please feel free
I
to
feel
ask.
like Michael Jackson doing this now. So I have a comment, then a question, then a recommendation, okay? So you got me with free air, Michelle, when you quoted him in your first slide. The Pedagogy of the Oppressed is one of my favorite books. Thank you for doing this. The comment is, this effort is so powerful in two ways, without getting into the details of this. It's powerful in the sense that it helps people assimilate into the community. It gives them a voice, and this is very important, especially for people who are coming from outside of the United States, including myself. And the second thing is, it helps people understand how money operates and where it needs to go. And this is very important for the future. So good job, that's my comment. Now the question, you started with one school district. What is the next step for you? Because you are the ones leading this initiative. So I'll give you a moment to answer after the recommendation real quick. The recommendation is promote it better. Reach out to other media outlets, because this is a very, very noble effort. And I appreciate the fact that you shared the podcasts and the websites and all of these things. That's good. But if you can expand it, that's the way to go. And now back to the question, what is the next step? Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Well, I'll have the experts on this panel. But for me, in my small world, as a mom, as working in an insurance company, in my church, like I have proposed this in, a lot of times where we either church programs, things are implemented, right? We think this specific program is going to solve the solution. But for me, in a church setting, for example, where I've led as a women's ministry leader, is equipped me to be like, how can I use PB in the church? Let's ask the congregation, are we hurting you guys? Do you guys feel included to be part of an institution like this? And also, for the future, as a Ghanaian, how can we use PB process in equipping, being that voice, whether I'm bringing that to my Ghanaian community, the Ghanaian Association of Rhode Island, and how those that are scared or hiding because they're undocumented, to equip them and say that do you know you have a voice, and help them assimilate with the education of budget. I didn't know how budgeting works until I became a steering committee member, because I had this notorious way of voting. I'll vote for Joanna is my favorite candidate, but the other ones that are making the impact in my city, I didn't care. So I would go mini, mo, and then I'm like, okay, I didn't see his sign. I didn't see, because I didn't know anything about them. So, and also with this process, finding out that many people are just like me. They don't know the power of money. They don't know, oh, yes, a lie. No, your voice. And also letting them know that, do you know the impact of us as a local people? Our voice is more, perhaps could be more powerful than looking into leaders. They're doing their best up there. But do you know what we can do on the lower side? We could move mountains on this lower side. So for me, in the future, in my world, I'm bringing this everywhere I go. Even as in my job, I'm working for an insurance company. And, they're doing this breastfeeding programs for that and all that. Have we asked the members of this insurance consumers that we use their data to get federal whatever money, and ask them, with that PCP or that breastfeeding program, did anybody call you? How do you feel as a consumer of this insurance? For me. So this is my future, and I'm running with it. So you could hold me accountable.
Amazing.
And if I could add to that, I mean, I think Joanna nailed it. I mean, this is what you want. You want to increase civic knowledge, financial literacy, and just get more people involved. Oop, phone dropped. I think for me on the social science side, thank you. Continuing to expand the implementation of the process and to show people that this works. So like right now, the state of PB as kind of an academic intervention it's something that makes people feel good. It's something that gives people voice. People get to experience a level of empowerment. What we need to do next is to show people that it's not only just makes people feel good, this improves communities in very tangible and important ways. So, you know, this is the beauty of the HES project, is because like, well, what happens when we can start to show evidence that, you know, mortality rates are impacted by this, that people are living longer, that racial gaps in how long in mortality rates are changing, that, you know, whether it's medical related outcomes or whether it's educational outcomes, that like people who have opportunities to be a part of PB or live in communities where PB is practiced, that this is increasing the quality of our public goods and services, that schools are better, hospitals are more responsive, that policing is better, that everything is happening at a higher rate, at a better rate, at a better level, the higher level of quality when the community gets to have the central voice on what this looks like. So like that's the next step, expand and to study it more carefully, more precisely, to show people not only that we can do this and that you can feel good doing it, that like this is a pathway to actually improving our lives in very material and meaningful ways.
Thank you guys so much. Are there other questions from our guests? Is that a question or a wave? Okay.
A quave?
Go for it.
I'm curious about how you go about building trust with the communities that you work with. I think that if a community has been like disenfranchised or doesn't already have a connection with voting and community advocacy, like how do you get them to like show up to your meetings or come out to vote?
I'll jump in with two quick thoughts. One is that when you're talking about invitations to a meeting or encouraging people to vote, those invitations, those asks have to come from community members. Because if we tried to go out just like as 1NB staff or as, you know, the Department of Health and knock on people's doors and say, come out and vote, that wouldn't have gotten people to come out and vote. You have to hear it from your neighbor, which makes a lot of sense. And then going forward in terms of building trust, we now actually have to make those projects happen and we have to make them align with the proposals that were developed by the folks who voted on these projects. So that is now up to One Neighborhood Builders and LISC as the backbones of these health equity zones to actually realize these visions that were shared with us. That's a lot of trust put into us to actually make these things happen, and now we got to do it.
I think time more than anything else is the biggest healer in this case, because I think, you know, as you're acknowledging, it's like folks where trust is really broken down, right? And so seeing these processes happen over time, and like Lucy said, actually seeing the projects coming to fruition and becoming real in the community is, I mean, like I think Becky mentioned it too, like we've been doing PB in Central Falls now for almost 5 years, right? And so when we go into the high school now and we're asking students to vote, they're like, yeah, of course. When at the beginning it was sort of like, what? And so now we're starting to really like build up, I don't know, culture is like a weird way to talk about it, but I think we're definitely seeing, you know, young people being much more interested and excited about it.
To get people for me, when we're trying to get the voting process, get people to vote, one of the things that is just building relationships with community members. Stop in that shop and say hi to the shop owner. How you doing? What's up? I'm here. Just go buy something little, just building the relationship and the connections for the people so that when they see you and you present that idea to them, we know you before. I know you. So what you're saying it might be true. And also like with my friendships or with, going to the bus stop and the parents that you see. So for me, I'm becoming more mindful about my attitude and my relationships to strangers, even the little things, being mindful not to cast that person out if I'm driving, because who knows, I might see them and like, yeah, I remember you, so all that. So when I go to the laundromat, I'm just saying hi, building more relationships, getting to know the restaurant, so paying attention, so that because if we have to do this work, we have to be kind. We have to know people where they are at. That neighbor that is not too friendly, say hi, because you never know when you need them. And then when it's time for you to pass that ballot, and like, whoa, what the heck are you doing at my door? You're so mean, you never say hi to. So for me, I'm just being more mindful in the little things that when people are walking by, my street, saying hi to them, because I'm saying hi, but I'm gonna get you with PB, and even with my church, being more present and being more active in the community. When for me, if there's something going in the community, don't attend just because I'm tired. I'm attending because I want to make that connection, so that when this big process comes, I'm like, hey, so that, oh, you see that park? Yeah, PB started it, and we need us to thrive in our city. So for me, it's just building the trust and letting people, hey, this is what is going on, sharing and all that good stuff. Sorry.
Thank you so much. We are at time, but I know that we have a little wine and cheese coming up after this. And so I am assuming our panelists would be excited to continue the conversation. We thank you guys all so much for being here and really appreciate everyone's time. And Lucy has one thing to say before
Just
we go.
so quick, I handed out a bunch of little mirrors earlier. Those have the 9 Neighborhood Fund logo on them, and we did order far too many during the process. So if you'd like more, let me know. We ran out of enough money to be able to print on the other side. You decide. The idea is like you look in the mirror, you decide. Anyway, help yourself to mirrors.
Hey, Michelle, before you leave, I gotta tell you this while you're in Paris. Check out Pont Neuf and the apartment where Jason Bourne was chasing the spies, okay? Very important.
Got it. Thank you so much for the recommendations. I hope y'all enjoy the wine and cheese. I'm gonna have to leave y'all because it is 1:30 a.m. for me over here.
Good night. Sleep well.
No, but this is incredible. Thank y'all so much. Bye.
I know.
Bye.